It's going to get awkward. It's going to get tense. It's going to get relieving. This is like the cycle of emotions all in one. I almost said it's like a buffet of emotions, but some of us like that's a trigger point, so I shouldn't have said that. But we're here for healing, so it comes full circle. Anyways, I'm rambling because we are about to get started. Today, we're going to unpack how to live life beyond the scale. And for many of us, the scale represents so much. But the way I want to frame it today is through the lens of Matthew 16:26. So it's Matthew 16:26. And it's a verse that may not seem applicable, but it really genuinely helped me put the scale in its proper perspective and its proper cadence. So let me read that if you don't have your scripture. If you do have your scripture, please read along. Matthew 16:26. What good will it be for a man if he gains the whole world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? Again, Matt 16:26. What good will it be for a man if he gains the world, yet forfeits his soul? Or what can a man give in exchange for his soul? I feel like when it comes to the scale, there's two ways to look at it. There's the way the world would perceive it, and then there's the way that God would perceive it. And what's fascinating about the way the world perceives the scale is it means so many different things to so much of us. But I'm just going to unpack the top three because, as we discussed a smidge earlier, I could go on forever. And this is a thing, like this could be a sermon series that took 6 months, but we don't need that much time to really unpack what I feel is the essence of God's mentality of it. So we're going to start here with the world. I feel like the world's way of looking at the scale is it props people up as massive successes or massive failures, depending on what the number says. I feel like the world assigns value as if the only part of the content of your character that can and should be judged is the number. But I also feel that it can act as a reminder to guilt us into apathy because it's a reminder of past that we can't get back. And so for me, these are the top three frustrations that not only I've experienced, but I've seen people struggle with, is the mentality of a perpetual failure. Great, every week I've failed. Every 4 days I've failed. Or you're only as good as what this number is. And that number only directs your character, nothing else. And then the guilt that comes from it. But I feel like the way that the Lord would look at that is entirely different. Because I feel like, not just in this scripture, but in the entire arc of the Bible, he's more concerned about your soul and what it does for your heart. And so I'm going to give you some context just to sort of make it real for y'all in terms of my struggle. So my battle with the scale, I guess technically my battle with the scale started when I was 5, because that's when I went on my first diet. But you get some grace when you're a kid because you're growing and like there's baby fat and you're going to grow up big and strong. And then middle school happens and it starts to become a little awkward and but then you get to high school and it starts to be an actual health issue, right? Like very few people question the 5 or the 10-year-old who's 10 pounds overweight. But, when you're 130 pounds overweight as a 16-year-old, there's some alarms that start to go off. And what's fascinating is if we look back to 1998, I didn't even think about that then. Okay, cool. So 1998, as a 5'6" individual then, I was supposed to be 188 pounds. And what's fascinating is that that number stuck with me for probably about 17 years, even though I ignored the fact that I had grown 4 extra inches. So your ideal weight for a 6 pound individual is a little, or my fault, 6 foot individual, a little different than a 5'6" individual. But that one time that I heard 188 is what stuck with me the rest of my life. And I feel like we as adults struggle with that as well. Because I feel like no matter where you're at, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, we'll go back to that one time where that one person made that one comment of, this is what you should be. And we'll totally forget that I'm now 40 and I've had 2 kids. Structurally, my bones are different and the quantifications have changed. People will tell us, hey, you're in your 50s. Muscle mass is going to deteriorate. You need to do these things differently. But we'll go back to that time where we were 20 and we were 5 foot whatever, and that one magazine said you should be this weight. And we'll just throw deuces to the medical professionals, and we'll be like, no, Vogue said I need to be this size, and if I'm not, life's over. And I feel like that's a very worldly way of looking at things. And so for me, I feel like we've got to start reframing what the scale is and what the scale isn't, to not just overcome it, but to have harmony with it. Because here's the most violent statement I'm going to make towards the scale. If you want to forever not be controlled by the scale, let it not matter. Because even when you're angry at it, it's controlling you. It's living rent free. When you're elated with it, it's living. It's there. It's not. But when you can look at it and go, huh, that's cool. Maybe I should weigh it. We'll see what's happening. It doesn't matter. It's kind of like Sum 41. People are like, what do you think of Sum 41? I'm like, they're a band. Oh, they're still making CDs? Cool. And then I move on. They literally don't matter to me. Not in a negative way. I mean, if I see a CD, maybe I'll put it in and listen to it. I'm not going to turn them off because I don't hate them. They're just there. It's like Sprite. Very few people like Sprite, but some people do. But it's like, I've never met anyone with a strong opinion on Sprite. Like, even if they don't like Sprite, they'll be like, yeah, I mean, it's not bad. But, Coke versus Pepsi versus RC, that'll start like Civil War #4. Like, but when someone asks you of Sprite, like I've never seen anyone go to the ropes hating Sprite. I never have. It's just like, yeah, Sprite, cool. It's like water, but with bubbles. Good. All right. A lot of sugar. Good. All right, cool. And so when we can get to the point with the scale where we understand what it actually is and not give it the control that it has had in our past, then we can start making the steps. But how do we do that? For me, it took 3 ways. The first way is to not make it an idol. Now, that seems simplistic, but let's really unpack that. Because the idolatry of the scale, I feel, is not necessarily longing for what that number says, but it's longing for all that approval and all of that praise and all of that glory and all the things that come along with it, that God's saying, but I thought I was your source. Why? If I created you and I gave you this wonderful identity, why are you so concerned with meeting that number when you say you're living for me, but you care more about that scale? And that was a hard truth for me to learn, because even as a Christian, like, you want to have scientific metrics, and we'll unpack that in a little bit. This isn't saying that we forego accountability. But what this is saying is that the scale, and maybe this will resonate if you've ever tried to apply for a loan or anything, is much like your credit score. Your credit score is the sum of 3 different identifiers. So when someone says, well, do you have healthy credit? They factor in 3 things. I feel like when it comes to your weight, it's the same way. Does the scale have some type of importance? I mean, it measures gravity and that's cool. But how are your pants fitting? How are your triglycerides? How's your blood sugar? How's your blood pressure? These are things that really matter way more than your weight. And so when we can start understanding that the scale plays a part, if you like baseball, it's like a relief pitcher, like it matters. But like you're not going to sell the whole franchise if you have a terrible relief pitcher. But we elevate it. And we need to stop that. Because I feel like we often make it an idol. And how do you know if you're making the scale an idol? Because of the way you feel about it, which is actually the second thing that helps us overcome how much power the scale has in our life, which is make sure the anxiety you have with the scale isn't false. Now, what do I mean by false anxiety? I love this comic. Forgive the language, it gets rough. We're all adults here. If you're not an adult watching this, put in your earplugs. So I saw this comic one time, I think it was in Good Housekeeping, and it's these 2 kids looking at the scale, and then the third one comes along and they're like, what is that? And the other kids are like, I don't know, mom calls it an effing liar. That's a harsh joke. I apologize for the crassness, but I've never forgotten it in like the 10 or 15 years. So many of us have anxiety when it comes to the scale because of what it represents. Because quite often, not always, but quite often, the scale reflects the effort we've put in. And I've had this happen multiple times where people will get really frustrated at their weight loss process and they'll go, I don't understand, I'm trying everything. And I'll go, oh, I'm sorry. Can I see your journal? Let's see where things might be going awry. Oh, I haven't journaled. Oh, okay. How's your exercise? Can I see your fit tracking? Oh, I'm not exercise. Like I did like 1 exercise in the past week. Okay. Do you remember anything that may have caused this? Well, I did Little Caesars 4 times this week. Okay. So we're really upset at the scale, but we have a very clear idea of why the scale is saying what it says, but we're mad at the scale because it reflected what we actually did. And so quite often what we do is we take the anxiety of the responsibility of what we feel we should be doing or what we know we should be doing, depending on what God's called us to do. And rather than taking that, we'll deflect it and we'll go, it's the scale's fault. But is it? Is it? And that's why I want to start with making sure it doesn't become an idol in our lives. Because if God is the ultimate litmus, then that should give us the emotional sanity to look at the scale and go, it is what it is. And I will pleasantly fight anyone on this. If the scale is not ideal, but we know how we got there, that's amazing. Because we can fix something that's not working. I will always say this. The most frustrating is when you feel like you're doing everything right and you've documented that you've done everything right and there still is no movement. That's where real frustration is. That's where real anxiety comes from. Because if you've done everything that you can control and the scale's still not reflecting as it should, then there might be an issue. There might be vitamin deficiencies. There might be something going on with the blood. But honestly, I'd say maybe 5% of the people that I've worked with, if not less, have ever had an issue that wasn't cured by doing the process that science has asked them to do with the heartfelt approach that God has asked them to do. And so, for number two, if you really want to overcome the scale's dominion in your life, does it actually have the anxiety that it's assigned? Or is it emblematic of things that maybe God's calling you to refine in your life, but it's that last little part that you're so desperately holding on because we crave control as people? And I'm the, right? Paul being chief of sinners, that's me. And when I got to college, after I lost my initial 120 pounds and I gained it all back, the reason why I gained all the weight back was I had done such a great job compartmentalizing my life. I was able to give my purity to God and my health, or my finances to God, and my health to God. But when it came to actual weight, that was the one thing that was so deeply personal that every time I thought about it and I remembered all the bullying and all the, I hate to say abuse, but man, like, I feel like there's a difference between people punching you because you're fat and people calling you fat. So whatever you want to call people punching me because I was fat, we'll just call it what it is. But you start looking at that and you're like, I don't get it, God. Like, where were you then? And it was that one thing where it's like, I didn't feel like I could give God control, but it was that absolute one thing that God was saying, trust me here and see what's possible. And I finally got to a point where I was like, I've done a really great job of doing everything else Christian. And honestly, I wasn't happy because I gained all the weight back. And so I got to the point where it's like what do I have to lose? Like, worst case scenario, if I give it all over to God and nothing happens, I'm exactly where I'm at. But what if I actually took that step and uncompartmentalized that life and lived a full life of obedience and worship? What would happen then? And what happened was the weight came off and it's never came back, which is why I'm so passionate about this concept, because it's not some etherical, I read in a book from the Mayo Clinic, like, I cried the tears, but I've also seen the success from this. And I feel that everyone deserves that success. They just have to tweak what God's calling them to do to make sure it's what God is calling them to do, and then they actually need to do it. So the second way to get over the chains that the scale has on us is to make sure that we're not putting false anxiety and identity to it. It's just, it's a piece of plastic or metal that quantifies gravity. That's all it is. Like, let's not treat it like it's a golden cow. And the third thing is, before you even weigh yourself, because a lot of us build up that whole, like, I don't know how y'all's taxes is, but man, it's always a crapshoot. Like, am I gonna owe money or am I gonna get money? It's like fiscal roulette. Like, I always have anxiety. Like, I just don't know what's gonna happen when I go in for tax time, especially as a small business owner. Every president seems to have a different opinion on it. And I feel like we do that with the scale. Like, it's weighing time. I'm either going to get all the Facebook praise or I'm going to go ghost for a while because I hate life. I feel like before we even ever get to that part of the scale, I feel like we absolutely need to go through the checklist of the fruits of the Spirit and ask ourselves, are we operating in a way that condones the fruits of the Spirit? So even before you weigh yourself, have you treated yourself with love the past week? Let's just assume you weigh once a week. Have you treated yourself with love this past week? And what does that mean? That means, were you kind to yourself if you had a struggle? Did you love yourself enough to not overdo it on certain foods that physically hurt you? Do you love yourself enough to give you the nutrition that your body asks for? Or do you give it pseudo-nutrition that is edible and could very well be sold as Play-Doh, but somehow the FDA signed off on it, and so now it's a Nutri-Grain bar? Another story for another time. Did you love yourself? Is there joy? Are you able to look at the process and go, yeah, God's called me to do some hard things, but I'm not in Ethiopia. That's hard too. My mission field is simply eating less than I ate before and doing more than I did before. Is there joy in the process? Is there a peace? Do you put your head to the pillow every night knowing that you've done the best you can for the God who's called you to this life? Is there patience? Is it an all or nothing mentality? Or do you say, I didn't gain it all in one day. I'm not going to lose it all in one day. I didn't gain it all in one week. It took a lifetime to gain it. It might take a lifetime to lose it. Statistically, it doesn't have to, but you never know. Is there patience in your process? Do you even have a process? Or are you just floating and hoping for the best? Is there goodness? Like, is there faithfulness? Are you still doing the things that God has called you to do? You know, if you've ever been in a long-term relationship, you should never stop dating your spouse or your partner, because the whole goal is, just because you've said I do, or just because you've given your life to God, doesn't mean the journey stops. That's where the journey begins. Are you still being faithful with what God has called you to do? Is there a gentleness to your approach? Like, and we've talked about this before, a lot of people will binge and then they'll purge. Well, that overcorrection really is like falling from the sky without a parachute. You know, if you have a less than ideal meal, you don't have to go and crush at the gym for 1,500 calories. You should do something, but are you being gentle to yourself? And is there even self-control? If you look back at your journey, was there self-control to prevent any of these anxieties? And so before we even get to this scale, one of the things that helped me break the mindset of what it is and what it isn't and the anxiety was just going through the checklist of the fruits of the Spirit. Because for me, and biblically, it's a pretty clear litmus of if God's involved. Because if you don't have these fruits in your spirit, then there's a disconnect. And quite often it's the things that we're not giving to God. It's the things we're desperately trying to take control of. So currently, you may ask, well, Jeremy, how often do you weigh yourself? Maybe once a month, if that, because it's always going to be the same. Like, as a 6-foot male who's almost 40, I've got this gap between 192 and 200. I should not be over 200 pounds. A, scientifically. B, I can feel myself start to jiggle when I get close. And so for me, as long as I'm between 192 and 200, oh well. Will I be 197? Will I be 195? Doesn't matter. My shirt fits. That's all that matters. Every year, annual physical, blood work, great. Blood pressure, great. Taking a multivitamin, great. And so when I look at my process, I love myself enough to eat fruits and vegetables and all the things that God has provided us for us to biologically and chemically sustain. I have joy in the process because I know that my journey isn't about me. My journey is to go forth and make disciples. And there was a huge time in my life where my weight and my body image kept me from doing that. And I didn't want to be that guy anymore. There's peace in my journey because if I have a bad meal, like Monday, it was my wife's birthday, so we went to Cracker Barrel and had Coca-Cola cake a la mode. I'm not going to have it every day, but I'm also not going to feel guilty because I had it, because there's peace in my life, because food wasn't an idol. It was a treat. It's a birthday. Have at it. I didn't long for it. I didn't lust for it. So there's peace with my food. I have patience. I'm getting older. Time's undefeated. I can do all I can to rehab this back, but there's still going to be scar tissue. So if I wake up and I don't kill it at today's workout, so what? I still worked out. Better than not doing anything at all. There's kindness. I've got stretch marks. Sorry, world, I'm not sexy. You know who cares? Nobody. God gave us an amazing body, and all the things that we're hypercritical of really is on us. all the things that you feel make you insufficient, they don't. They really don't. I spent years thinking I had man boobs after I lost my man boobs. Turns out I just had a chest. You know who have chests? Men. Actually, everyone has chests. Why was I freaking out? Well, because when I was 16, I had like a C cut. But when I was 35, I didn't. You see how fun it is to try to get over memories? But I've learned, for God so loved the world. Wait a minute, that includes me. I ain't about to mess with his creation by insulting it. And because of that, I allow the goodness of that walk and that relationship to spring forth. And I do my best to be faithful. I want to be a good steward of my time. I want to be a good steward of my resources. I want to be a good steward of everything I have. I want to be gentle. I don't want to be angry. I lost weight once when I was angry. It didn't work out. And I have self-control. And it's great. I will say beyond self-control is probably God a lot. But I have the fruits of the Spirit very prevalent in the process. And I feel like that was a really good way of knowing, hey, I'm doing everything that I should be doing scientifically and from a Christ-centered standpoint. That's what God's called me to. God's called me to worship him through my actions. God's called me to love him with all of my heart. God's called me to move and do the things he's called me to. And so when I look at this verse, Matthew 16:26, there's the way the world looks at the scale, which I think a lot of us unfortunately fall into that trap. But then I feel there's the way the Lord looks at the scale, which is, are you doing the things that would reflect positively? Because that's way more important than the number. The number is just science. But beyond that, beyond the scale, are you living in a way that God would say, well done? God doesn't ask you for perfection. He just asks you for progress. Are you in process? You don't go from sinner to saint in one day. You get saved. And then the rest of your life is a refining process. But you've got to play a part in that. You've got to seek to make better choices in your Christian life. Are you making those type of choices in your health life? And if you're not, that probably should have a higher importance in your life than the scale. If you're not living in a way that encourages the fruits of the Spirit, that should have a higher importance in your life than the scale. And I guarantee you, if you just took a month and you didn't look at the scale at all, and instead you said, I'm going to do things in my life that are in direct correlation with the fruits of the Spirit, I guarantee you that scale would have a positive result. Because if you loved yourself, or if you loved yourself the way like you love your neighbors, you're going to do certain things that reflect negatively on the scale, but they'll be positive because you've changed those behaviors. I mean, we could go all day, but that's what makes it personal to us, is that we know the things that God's called us to, and we know the things that we're not doing. And I feel like we make the scale the enemy, but the scale isn't the enemy. The enemy is the enemy, and he's messing with our heads via the number on the scale and what the world says. So I'm not just going to challenge you. I'm going to implore you. Don't look at the scale the way it looks at it. Don't look at the scale the way the world looks at it. The scale doesn't give you value. The scale doesn't give you worth. It may give you esteem, but that esteem's fleeting. I guarantee you all the Instagram millionaires will be broke once Instagram gets replaced by something else. Just ask TikTok. But what's going to actually sanctify your soul? What's going to get you a well done, good, and faithful servant? Will it be six-pack abs? Or will it be waking up every day knowing that you did the best you could with the decisions that were before you for your earthly benefit and for the kingdom benefit and the glory of God? If you do those things, scale is going to be useless because it won't even matter. But if you don't do those things and you start treading back to the way the world views what health and fitness is and what the scale is, you're going to fight it for the rest of your life. And that would be a shame because you're worth so much more than a number. And I hope you never forget that. Your health and wellness is not a number on the scale. It is an opportunity to glorify God through your behaviors. Please don't ever forget that. And if you can live in the place where the fruits of the Spirit are the actual things that keep you accountable, then you'll have to replace the batteries on the scale more than you'll use it. So I pray for a very Christ-like mentality as you go forward with your weight loss. And I'm going to genuinely pray for that, because freedom can be had and you can have life beyond the scale. But you've got to do the things that invite the Spirit into your process first. Because honestly, without the Spirit, we're going to struggle and we're going to paddle uphill. And that doesn't even make sense, because how can you paddle uphill? You're not even in water, right? That means it's time to pray. Lord,